Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. We have a lot to cover, so I'm going to just jump right into it. So, hi, everyone. My name is Sofia Garcia. I am the founder and director of ARTXCODE, a generative art house supporting the contemporary algorithmic arts community since say around 2018. We manage and represent emerging and leading generative artists, and we also have an in-house creative studio that advises, designs, and executes on generative art exhibitions, online releases, and really anything in between related to Web3 and generative art, both for ourselves and for some institutional clients. So as the lead curator, I've organized a number of generative art exhibitions featuring NFT-backed works since around 2019. And I've spent the last 4 years, which in this space feels like 4 decades, working with artists to tell their stories and showcase their work in a meaningful way. So I really want to start off by looking into two core ideas, which is what does it mean to be a curator? What is generative art? I'd also like to take you through my story, how I got into all of this, and end off in a case study on NFT curation and exhibition design. So let's just jump right into it. So what is a curator? So if you look at the Cambridge definition of what a curator is actually very, very broad. They don't really give much context, and it's just a person in charge of a museum, library, etc. That is the definition that they give. However, for a curator, the term, curate has also a broad and complex meaning, and there are multiple types of curators and various practices of how curators operate. So this term curator is like now a vast kind of all-encompassing category, which embraces multiple types of workers in the field of visual arts, which includes education and the many disciplines that kind of constitute the organization of art exhibitions. Art curators kind of work with various organization operations, whether art galleries, film festivals, art publication houses. Obviously, there's the institutional curators. So institutional and independent art curators work closely with artists to build relationships with collectors, develop projects, and advance the industry of art. In history, cultural studies, museums, libraries, curators are the caretakers of information, artifacts, artworks, and more. They are the mediators and preservers of historical knowledge. And but regardless of the field that a curator works in their day-to-day, really does look at, a lot of extensive research, reading, writing, and of course, a lot of admin tasks. So, but generally speaking, a curator manages the process of making knowledge, history, and artworks visible to the public. I think that's really the most important thing, and being able to tell these stories. And there's no one size fits all approach to becoming a curator. So if there are any of you listening in that are interested in pursuing curation, I hope my story can kind of help show that. So the next most important thing is, what is generative art? And so this is a really interesting subject that I'm really, really passionate about, not only as a subject matter, but kind of when we think about the taxonomy of generative art, especially in the Web3 ecosystem. So within the NFT ecosystem, the term generative art typically lends itself to describe any artwork that has been procedurally generated with an algorithm. And under this contemporary vernacular, the term is pretty synonymous with digitally native artwork. However, according to some scholars, especially Galanter, so Philip Galanter, if you have not heard of him, I definitely recommend reading his writings. He's kind of like the foremost, most quoted scholar on generative art theory. But generative art can really be applied to any instance where an artist deliberately relinquishes control, either partially or fully, to a functional process or system in the creation of an artwork. And so in this case, generative art is really a reference to how an artwork is made. However, the method is independent from any particular technology. And a prime example of generative art under this kind of broad definition is Islamic tiling, where artisans really follow an intricate rule-based system to generate geometric designs. So this classification kind of provides an interesting dilemma for the taxonomy of generative art, especially generative art produced with a computer, because regardless of the symbiotic relationship between the term, computer and generative, a computer is actually not required to create or execute generative art. However, the generative art that we think about today still very much does fall under this category, as does AI artwork and GAN work, but I think it's a really important distinction to be made. And so in my practice specifically, I do try to go more with the term algorithmic art when we're talking about things like what we see on art blocks, and what we're kind of like more comfortable seeing in the everyday Web3 discussions when we talk about generative art. So in this instance, the use of a computational machine is very, very important. And in this, kind of my definition here is algorithmic art really refers to any instance where an artist deliberately relinquishes control, again, either partially or fully, to an algorithm they have written that results in a completed work of art. And so what this looks like from behind the scenes, and we'll use Monica Rizzoli's Fragments of an Infinite Field as an example, this is just a part of the algorithm that Monica has written. This is a system that she's produced, and when she presses run, it will run kind of autonomously and produce something that she may have never realized. But it is this kind of relationship between the artist, the system they've created, and the computer that's actually translating that in its own way. So there's this collaboration at play that I think is really, really important. So this is kind of like, the overall framework in which, to kind of like look at what we're going to be talking about in a bit. But this is kind of, first getting started. So, how does one become a generative art curator? How does that happen? And again, I just kind of want to stress that there is no one size fits all approach. And to kind of demonstrate that, I want to, again, to go through my story into becoming a generative art curator full time. So it actually starts off as, in 2010, 2011, I was actually really, really interested in street art and graffiti and all these things, especially growing up in Miami. All of these photos here are really from the art district, now referred to as Wynwood. All of the places, I think, where you can see these murals that I painted with some friends. That's me in the top left corner. Are now kind of turned into shops and things of this sort. But it was kind of like my first foray into the arts. It was a really fun way to express myself and hang out with friends and really appreciate what was going on in the art scene. I started working at a gallery at the time, and it was a lot of really great fun, but at the same time, it wasn't providing me what I needed to really support myself. And so it was around 2014, 2015 that I just said 2015, I believe, that I took my first coding class. And it was at this coding class that I learned the programming language C. It was very difficult for me, someone coming from, again, like an arts background. I really had never taken an advanced mathematics class. Like, I don't even think I ever took, no, I know that I never took a calculus course. I was I kept it pretty safe on that front, but, it was really important for me to kind of test myself and put myself out there. And this was a really big aha moment. The second I really started to pick up on the semantics and the, just the process of writing code. And what it did more than anything was really open my eyes to the world of technology, and something that I think I had taken for granted for a very, very long time. So what I mean by that is, beforehand, I could have stepped into an installation like this and kind of just been like, oh, that's cool. This is nice, but have no context into how it was produced. And for the first time, I really saw how human focused technology was, and the fact that there had to be someone behind the scenes that really starts off with a screen that looks just like this to produce something that looks like this. And so the artistry that it comes into play with not only an exhibition, but even a website, someone having to write that. And so I found myself now looking at the world kind of with new eyes, and pretty much being like, looking at something that was produced and being like, how did they do this? Who did that? Instead of kind of just assuming that it just existed. So it really provided this new context for me in looking at this world around us that is so, encompassed by technology. And at the same time, kind of studying art history and being really into history as a whole, I became fascinated with the history of computer graphics. Like, this really just dominated my attention for pretty much ever since. But I went really deep into the research on my own, kind of documenting all of this stuff as much as I could, taking notes, and really trying to understand the human relationship that we have with computers. This was all really self-study, again, something that I did for fun. And at the same time, a friend of mine was like, well, if you're interested in the arts and computers and coding, why don't you take a look at processing? And so processing, which ultimately ended me leading me to find P5 and Dan Schiffman, really changed my life for the better. This is another case of intense self-study. I found myself staying home on the weekends, just watching Dan Schiffman videos on YouTube. For those of you who aren't familiar with Dan Schiffman, he has a YouTube channel on YouTube called The Coding Train, and he has a really awesome intro lessons, and I just became obsessed. So again, I found myself just doing this all the time, trying to figure it out. And through that, I actually started volunteering with Girls Who Code clubs and different after school programs in Miami, really focusing on teaching young girls how to work with code. And through there, we ended up starting a new nonprofit called Cohort in 2015. Kind of these are some of our students from that time, and we had our first Code Art Fest, which was kind of a culmination of all the different girls and all the groups that we had gotten together at the time to submit their artwork, and we would do competitions. We actually just celebrated our seventh iteration of Code Art Fest this weekend, which was amazing. This first one that we did in 2016, we had 100 submissions. This year we definitely had over 1,000. So it's been a really cool, thing to see over the last few years. But again, this is kind of me just exploring, playing around, seeing how I could work with the community in the best way possible. But again, I was really just doing a lot of nonprofit work and making some websites. But at this time, I was kind of alone in my interests, especially within my community in Miami. And so this is when I actually started ARTXCODE. This is how it all kind of came together. And it actually started off as an Instagram account. And this Instagram account was a place for me to kind of find community. And this is my first post, which is really just a screenshot of a tutorial that I was doing. But this is kind of, just trying to find out who else was doing this, who else was into it, and was kind of like my first foray into quote unquote curating, more not so much on the in the way that I was now, but still trying to form stories together, get people to understand what was going on. And it was at this time also that I started, working on websites, and I ended up actually getting a job as an engineer at JP Morgan. And so this was also really important because it was the first time I was really able to, provide for myself and support these artists by starting to collect their work. And simultaneously, I was kind of looking into crypto and Bitcoin. I have to give credit to my dad, who was very much into all of this. And so I had done a Bitcoin hackathon in, I think, 2016 at that time. Also won second place. We, won some Bitcoin. I opened my first Coinbase account. I was going to, MIT had a hacking arts hackathon. That was the first time I learned about crypto collectibles. I believe that was in 2017, 2018. That was definitely in 2018. So around this time, again, I'm working as an engineer at JP Morgan. I start collecting these artworks. And at one of these events that I went to, I found out about this event called the Contemporary and Digital Art Fair. And so at that moment, I was collecting works from Dmitry Cherniak and Tyler Hobbs. And so I decided I wanted to showcase their work at this art fair. It was $75 for a booth. I had never done a physical booth before or showcased work in person. So this was really my first foray into a proper, I guess, quote unquote, curation. And it was a really special moment. Sebastian Sanchez, who now is head of digital at Christie's, was my co-founder at the time. And he was really, really pivotal in making sure that this was a successful exhibition, because I had never done it before, and he had a lot of experience. So these are some posters from the event. I actually coded the moving poster here to the right. This was kind of our first take on our branding, which was inspired by an El Lissitzky poster that I was really, really obsessed with at the time. And so this was the first exhibition that we really ever put on at the Contemporary and Digital Art Fair. We were down in the basement. Across from us were the CryptoPunks, and it was a really, really special moment. But again, this was kind of pre-NFT as we know it today. We had a booklet there filled with the code, so you could look at all the code that correlated with every single artwork here. And OpenSea was sponsoring this event, so we did actually have an artwork. I don't know if you can see my mouse here, but this one here by Dimitri had not sold yet. It was the most expensive one in the exhibition at $1,500, or I think it was $1,595, and we hadn't sold it yet. And so we kind of had the idea, well, why don't we make an NFT of this work? And I will admit, at first, I did not want to do it. I was like, at this moment, my understanding of NFTs was more on the collectible side. I really saw this as a fine artwork, but we decided to do it. And this collector was actually really interesting in the fact that they said that they didn't want the physical work. So this print that was there, they had no interest in having the print. They just wanted the NFT, and that was a really interesting for me. I told them no. I told them you absolutely need to take the print with it. But when I came and brought them the print, it was the first time someone showed me their virtual gallery. I got to go through crypto voxels, and it was kind of this aha moment, understanding how certain collectors were really thinking about this. But throughout 2019, we really started experimenting with NFTs as certificates of authenticity for these physical artworks. And so just to kind of move through a little bit quickly, this is another exhibition that we did in 2019 when the computer made art. This featured the works of Zach Bottorff, Dimitri Cherniak, Manolo Gamboa, David Marugula, Helena Sarin, and Ben Snell. And this was an opportunity for me to also start pushing my own curatorial practice. And so here you can see we now include, more artists. We have kind of more experimental on the framing that we did. And also we included sculptures, AI sculpture. So this is a really fun, a really fun thing to experiment with. But then, we hit 2020, and 2020 really changed everything. So now we were no longer doing work exhibitions in person. There was an exhibition that was supposed to happen in Paris. It ultimately ended up getting canceled. And in this exhibition, I was featuring the works of Harshit Agrawal. If you don't know him, he's a really, really wonderful AI artist based off in India. But this was a really important moment because this exhibition that was supposed to happen ended up being put online, but it actually didn't do very well at all. The user experience was really clunky. You weren't really able to purchase directly through the website. And so these physical works that we were thinking about selling, none of them sold. They were going to be prints, and they were kind of like made to order sort of things. And because we never got any orders, I had never really done a sale before that we didn't sell everything. I decided to kind of think this through, and I asked the artist if he would be open to putting the works up on Super Rare. And this was the ultimate aha moment in my career for sure, because we put the works up on Super Rare, and it was recommended to us by the team there to not put any price points, to just let the market decide and see what happens. So we put the works up there, and the bids started coming in, and every single work that we had minted on Superware sold for more than we had even imagined selling the physical prints for. So for the first time, I'm really seeing this group of collectors come out paying for a digital only artwork. It was so crazy to me. I actually changed my commission structure. I dropped my commission by over 10% because on my side, I didn't have to pay for production. I didn't have to pay for shipping. And so it was a really, really special moment. And then, later on in 2021, we did another exhibition with a really wonderful AI artist called Yuma Kishi, and it was really, really great. And so this is kind of just like hopefully I'm spark notes. I know I've been talking a lot, but kind of like my first foray into curating those first few years. But then I want to talk about the introduction of art blocks and how this really changed so much for us. So, in November of 2020, Eric Calderon launched art blocks with the Chromie Squiggle. So this was the first open marketplace dedicated to on-chain algorithmic art, which is obviously a really big difference from the way in which I was showcasing generative art or algorithmic art beforehand, which was kind of decoupling the physical artwork and the code that produced it. So now for the first time, we can have have all of these works together under one token. The platform was, what was released with Snowfro's Chromie Squiggle. This algorithm was written in p5.js, and it was capable of producing 10,000 unique Chromie squiggles, or this single undulating line of brightly colored gradients. And when you click it, it animates. The release of art blocks really does represent this convergence point of innovation across art, science, and mathematics, and really kind of like delineates the start of the contemporary algorithmic art renaissance, and catalyzed kind of like this new algorithmic art form entirely referred to as long form algorithmic art. So some people will say long form generative art. Again, I'm really trying to be specific in this instance, in this long form algorithmic art, in the sense that this is being produced by an algorithm. So this paradigm shift kind of proposes a new critical framework for long-form generative art. So in conjunction with the typical artistic benchmarks of composition, color, and line work, the long-form artists working on art blocks must craft a system that is capable of producing at times up to 1,000 unique outputs that, without question, share the same visual language as a foundation. There is this necessary balance that's at play between variation and cohesiveness. If there is too little variation, the system can be deemed repetitive or maybe a little bit boring. If it's too much, the visual language of the algorithm is considered weak and unfocused. So the refinement process between logic and intuition requires an intricate balance of skill and collaboration between the artist and the technical constraints that exist within the code. The bounds in which the work exists must be explicit, yet visceral enough to warrant a large body of work that evokes this understanding of inherent skill. So this is kind of my framework, kind of the overarching framework that I look at and critique generative art, or long form generative art specifically. And it's hard to know this up front. And I think we saw this happen in 2021 with the rise of all these auction houses kind of jumping in, and all the different exhibitions that were coming out within the NFT community, on this. And so, because I kind of spent the last few years kind of curating these shows and things like this, this is something I just did for fun. I was not doing this for money. I really just loved all of it. And kind of seeing the traditional art world attempt to hijack the narrative around NFTs at auction houses, especially after the Beeple sale. They kind of proved time and again that they lacked a deep understanding, or honestly respect, for displaying digitally native artwork. And I do have to admit, I kind of took it personally. I was seeing works that I absolutely adored being exhibited on kind of haphazard displays, curated under the basis of what will sell at the highest price, and being thrown on a TV screen because hey, it's digital, right? So in 2021, I decided to quit my job as an engineer at JP Morgan in an attempt to address a single prompt. How does our relationship with digitally native artwork change when experienced in a physical space? So I really channeled this frustration and decided to organize a large-scale exhibition focused on algorithmic art in Art Basel, Miami, aptly named The Digital. So this exhibition was my attempt to translate this beautiful, culturally rich digital ecosystem we were engaged with into the quote unquote real world that seemed confused and dismissive about what we were all doing. The Digital explored these questions by presenting a series of art prints, digital frames, and projections of algorithmic art. Every piece there was made up of lines of code, and to this day lives on the Ethereum blockchain. By bringing these NFTs into our physical world, the exhibition really just kind of was seeking to contextualize on-chain generative art as a formative movement within our contemporary culture. So I'm going to walk through a loose framework of my key findings and prompts I asked myself as I kind of went along this exhibition specifically. And hopefully, it'll help you guys as artists in your future relationships with curators. So one of the first things is, the art of storytelling. So what is your story? As a curator, it is my job to know your story and to be able to tell it properly. It's considering whether an exhibition makes more sense in the physical or the digital world, or perhaps even both. As an artist, it is thinking through the life cycle of your work. So for the majority of digital artists engaging in NFTs, you might consider the life cycle of your work complete once the work has been minted and acquired. However, I no longer think it's enough to just create a visual work and rush to mint it. What you're doing is important. When you mint an artwork, you are registering it on a global ledger for everyone to see. So please document it. Think through the purpose of your work. Consider the literature of your hopes and dreams for this piece. This also gives you space to consider, would you like to see your work as a print? If so, on what paper? Perhaps it should be projection mapped, or how do you really see this work? And so the reason I say this is at the same time it's not that simple. The NFT ecosystem has provided a new complexity to curation and exhibition design. So you can kind of see some of the works that we had here. So when we were organizing the digital, there were a lot of questions considering the display for various artworks we were exhibiting. And, this display dilemma, it was really, really clear when we were trying to figure out how to display the works by Casey Rias. So this work, This Century by Casey Rias, is circular. It kind of threw me for a loop at first when I was thinking through this and trying to figure out what was the best way to display this work. I was thinking maybe we can create portholes over screens, or what do I do? But this is where it's important to know your story. So Casey knew his story. I instantly reached out to him after I was kind of thinking this through initially, and I asked him, like, how should I be displaying this work? And without missing a beat, he said, it should be production mapped onto circular discs. And so, I was like, okay, great. So I worked with my production team and we did just that. We created these circular discs, we mounted them onto the wall, and we had them projection mapped right onto the screen. And so this is, again, one of the importance of really thinking through, how do you want your work to be viewed? Because in our day-to-day, like engaging in the NFT ecosystem, we see the works like this on a grid, right? We see it on a grid as we're going through OpenSea or whatever other platform you're searching through, and it's not the same. It's not the same as experiencing it in person like this. So I really do just invite you all to really think through what that means to you and how it might affect your work in the future. And the same thing applies for various other works. There were a lot of other works that I thought would make a lot more sense as prints to really pull out the textures that were at play here. So one of the cool things about this work, about this exhibition too, were that there are a lot of pieces here that, you might see really small on your screen, but once they're printed, you actually get to walk up to them, see the textures that actually exist there. You're not on your phone. You're one of the coolest things about this exhibition was seeing people get up close and personal with this work. So in the bottom right quadrant, we have a work by Tyler Hobbs, this Fidenza, which is, it's actually really fun too, because this work was quote unquote not rare in the kind of like rarity trait side of it, but visually was really rare, and it had these soft shapes and they were really, really small. But again, seeing it on your screen, you don't get to see the details as if you would walking up to it. The same thing, the upper right quadrant, we have a work by Sarah Ridgely, which is a series of algorithmically generated clouds that has deckled edges on the side that you might actually miss if you're not there to see it in person, or see it manifested as a print. After this exhibition, I was really, really happy because I saw a lot of people leave that exhibition and start buying her work, which initially did not sell out. It did not mint out when it first released, and she actually closed the project early. So to see people really be able to appreciate it after seeing it in this context was really, really inspiring and really exciting. So another question I really ask myself when we're thinking about these sorts of exhibition is to wire or not to wire. This is, again, something I think about a lot. And context is important when we think about wire management. So, for example, these are examples of artworks where the wiring is really important. It really leans into the story that the artists are trying to tell with their projects, and they play into the narrative. This is really, really important. The messiness, the kind of like in-your-face nature of the wiring really shows like this the importance of technology in this work. However, that's not always the case. And so, when we were thinking about displaying works in the digital, we wanted to give these works space to breathe. And in this instance, how we built out the walls in this space, because it was a completely raw space. They were hollow walls. We wired everything through them. We ordered custom screens. We made custom frames to kind of be popped on top of them. We hid the wires to really give these works space to be on their own and to be celebrated as these artworks independent of whether or not they were digital or not, to really create that illusion that you were just walking through an everyday art exhibition. And again, knowing your story is really important. And again, kind of anecdotally, this centerpiece here, this grid here of colors, the color grid studies by Jeff Davis, this is a work that is still. However, when I spoke to Jeff about displaying his artwork, he made it very, very clear that this work needed to be displayed on a digital canvas. And he said that because this project is a study of digital colors. And so to showcase it as a print completely decouples it from the context in which the work is supposed to exist. And so, again, this is the importance of knowing your story, knowing what you're trying to accomplish with your work. And then, there are these other cases where, it's important to experiment. And, there's the occasional curveball when you're thinking about displaying the work. In this case, we had the Chromie Squiggle. The Chromie Squiggle is a really interesting work. Because at first glance, it might seem a little juvenile. It might not seem like much, but it means so much to the contemporary algorithmic art movement. And it's this piece that holds a lot of weight, and again, kind of represents this ushering in of a new movement. And so as a curator thinking about it, what's the best way that I can showcase this work that really kind of honors that message, that maybe not be initially what the artist thought. And so this is where this collaboration came into play, with myself as a curator giving a recommendation with the artist. And so I became pretty obsessed with this idea of the work being displayed as a hologram, this kind of digital artifact that we could walk around and look around like we were looking at, this artifact from Mesopotamia at a museum. You know what I mean? Where you're going through these old artifacts, walking around them and just being able to take it all in. And so I passed this along to the artist, who thankfully was very open to the idea, but we did have to get a third-party 3D artist to translate the work and work in collaboration with the artist to make this happen. And ultimately, I think it was a great success in doing that, and I'm really happy that we were able to do it. One of the coolest things, again, like of this exhibition was, people coming in and kind of just like flocking over to this display and kind of, like bugs saliva in the best way, without the death, obviously. Just like being so enamored by it, and it was so inspiring to see kind of like the effect that this had, and really being able to see this vision come to life. So. I think it's really important, again, like as you think about yourselves as artists, working with curators, to kind of like the main takeaways here, really hone in on your story, consider the display of your work. Wire management is very important, and to experiment. I'm hoping that I didn't go too fast, but this is kind of the end of my presentation. So thank you guys. Thank you so much. I'm hoping that we have some time for Q&A, and we can kind of dive into anything that you think I might have surpassed or whatever. But I'm open to any conversations you guys are willing to have right now. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophia. This is really a fantastic story that you've told us. I'm curious about how collectors respond to your curation, because, of course, you've made decisions that accommodate the artist. And I can imagine that if a curator comes along and wants to install one of these works in their home, perhaps, or collect it, you've encountered, I think, some disparity in expectation with your first experience where the collector refused to want to keep the print and instead just wanted the NFT. How might collectors respond to, say, the exhibition of a Chromie hologram? And how would you integrate it into a collector's home? Or do you have to work entirely with institutional collectors in order to promote the careers of your stable of artists?
Wonderful question, and it's something that I look at all the time. I'm constantly working with collectors on this front. So one thing to note I thought was, and I actually probably missed on this a little bit, was in this exhibition, it was actually really, really important for me to make sure that the artists did not sign the prints or anything like this. So in this case, it was display only. And I think that's an important distinction specifically for this type of work and the context in which it lives. So with on-chain generative art, we can really look at the artwork itself being the work running live in the browser. And so, I kind of made this this kind of ongoing joke with some of the people at the exhibition where it's like, you can take those ringers off the wall and run away with them, but have a good time trying to sell them. You know what I mean? So these are really displays, and we can be really flexible in the ways in which we think about display for these works in the home. When especially when you're working in collaboration with the artist. When it comes to the hologram, this is a really special case in which the artist gave their blessing. We worked with another artist to kind of produce this. I did have a collector ask if he was able, the collector who acquired the Chromie Squiggle in this instance did ask to have the hologram, but my response to him was that this hologram is not included in the sale of it, and if this is something that you wanted to do, we at least have this file, but it would be an additional cost to get it set up, get it put in their homes, and things of this sort. They ultimately ended up passing, but this is kind of like it's always a discussion, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach when we think about retrofitting this artwork into a collector's home, which I have done. Usually it is done again in collaboration with the artist and thinking through what's going to be the best case scenario for this. This also opens up a whole can of worms when we think about prints and NFTs and the relationships that they have together. I think right now especially, and I can use art blocks as an example. Right now the in the token, if you take a look at a token on art blocks, it does not say anywhere that there's a print associated with the artwork. There's nowhere that says on this public ledger that there's a physical manifestation of the work in any capacity. And so there's a little bit more flexibility in the way that you think about that, but also a lot more nuance. I do find it really interesting when artists do say or have an NFT that very clearly states that there is a sculpture or there's a physical aspect to the work, and that this NFT is actually just a record dictating that there's a physical work that exists, and this is kind of that certificate of authenticity, because NFTs have multiple use cases, and if you want to use it in that sense, I think that I'm a big supporter of that use case. So there are instances where, I'll sell a NFT that is actually a certificate of authenticity of a sculpture. And so when a collector acquires that NFT, they actually get a physical sculpture that will be in their home. And if they do sell it, it is required that the sculpture also goes with it, and all that verbiage is included in the token. Hopefully I haven't gone off on too much of a tangent, but that's to say that, it's always a conversation amongst the collector, and of course always with the artist, and figuring out what's going to be the best use case to showcase this work in their home.
Thanks for a great answer. That's lovely to hear, Sofia.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? And there's lots to talk about, I'm sure.
I'll ask another question. Sophia, was there an example of an artwork that was very, very difficult for you to actually showcase in a gallery context? Are you willing to actually divulge what kinds of specific challenges proved to be really, really difficult in this particular kind of artistic setting?
Yeah.
What kinds of challenges arise as a curator that are perhaps unpredictable or really surprising for you as a curator?
So I'm actually really excited to explore more of the more challenging, I guess, display types this year specifically. Really looking more into interactive works and works that kind of have to run live. So there's always that kind of moment of error that exists, or I guess that opportunity for error that exists, and also looking at like performance and things of this sort, which, in these exhibitions that I've shown you, there's a sort of safety that exists in showcasing a print or a video file or things of this sort, that kind of provide some sort of safety net in the sense that this work will stay on. It will be there. And so when you're working with something that runs live, or if you're working with within a setting that maybe doesn't have the best wiring options or electrical routing, that also poses a really interesting dilemma, especially as someone who's obsessed with wire management, and again kind of creating this illusion of this like non-digital side of it, if necessary, at least. So I think it comes down to just understanding the different ways in which digital art manifests itself, and again, no one size fits all approach, and trying to work with the constraints that you have both in the physical setting, and how the artwork is supposed to exist. That's always a challenge, but it's part of the fun. It's the same way in which, like, if you're working with a certain software, there's always constraints within those softwares. It's the same approach with curation and exhibition design. It's yeah, so there's a lot of challenges with displaying digital art that don't exist in traditional artwork, and there's even and that's not to say there aren't like really hard exhibition choices that have to happen when you're thinking about long like big sculptural displays and things of this sort. So the larger the project, the more large scale it is, the more the more room for error there is. But I'm excited to kind of start exploring that and looking into it. But digital artwork is not easy to work with, but I'm hoping that over the next few years we can really just continue to refine on that and find better solutions.
Have you thought about obtaining your own specific gallery space where you would then be in control of all of the parameters for display without having to accommodate
Yes,
that new
of
space?
course. That would be ideal. I always think about, I think about it a lot. I mean, one of the fun parts about what we get to do in the kind of like this decentralized art world of ours is kind of do these pop-ups all over the world. I think ideally what I would have is more of a studio office space that kind of feels more like a living area where we can see this work again and kind of context it in a living space. I think that's always really important for me. This exhibition that I showcase here is more of kind of it kind of elucidates more like institutional, like museum white cube feel, but I think it's really important to show how we can live with digital art and experience it in our day to day. So I think that's more of the feel that I would want to have in my own exhibition space. But yeah, I mean, hopefully that comes in the next few years, and we can have a place for people to come and see this work and be able to experience it in person. But for now, it's been really fun to be able to kind of like pick up and do fun exhibitions all over the place. But yeah, I think for sure one day it'll come.
Well, I like this idea that you would create an exhibition space that actually emulates a living space so that people can feel more at home with it. I don't think I've ever actually seen a single gallery do much like that. What's the model for it? Or is that just your unique invention now? I mean, that seems like a really wonderful suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I think even, let's see if I can go back. There's in which one was it? It was this one that we did in 2019. It was even just like adding a rug and like two chairs for people to sit in to kind of feel like they were, this is not nearly as sophisticated as I would want it to look, but again, this idea of like feeling homey, feeling comfortable amongst the art, being able to sit down, have a conversation, with some florals next to you. Again, kind of like that organic side of it all. That was always really, really important for me, even back then. So it's I think I have one vision of taking over a home here in Miami, like in like Little Havana or something like this, an old Florida home, and kind of having this fun juxtaposition of crazy digital art amongst this like very like homey, cozy house. So hopefully I'll be able to do that sooner than later. But yeah, it's always been really important to me because I think there's kind of this misconception around digital art of it being cold and, the computer based and things like this. But one of the best compliments I got in this exhibition specifically was, again, this was a contemporary and digital art for everything there. Everything around me was very digital, and someone kind of walked into this booth and was like, "Why are you here? What's digital about this work?" No one really understood that everything here was made with a computer, with code, or with an AI model, and I was really happy about that. At first, I was like, "Should I be offended?" And I was like, "No, actually, this is great. There are kind of there's a misconception here that this work maybe could have been hand painted or made with artwork," and because I think the context in which it was shown, and again, kind of like breaking the model of how you imagine digital art to live. So yeah, that's kind of how I really like to think about it.
It's great. It's really very cool. It does put me in mind that collectors occasionally open their homes as museum experiences, where you can see the artwork in situ. And but I don't think curators or owners of galleries have actually emulated that particular kind of model. I'm actually impressed by this particular idea, especially within this context where it's not immediately obvious that the digital artwork is very easily integratable into the collector's setting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, there's a lot of things that I think we get to explore now, and I think that's one of the most exciting parts about being able to curate in this moment in time. I don't think I would have ever imagined, especially at this moment in like December of 2019, that people were actually going to care about digital art in the way we do now. I thought we still had at least 5 to 10 years before the term NFT was being widely used. So it's been really surprising, but also like a huge honor to be able to participate in these like explorations and work with artists and institutions and collectors and really try to understand the future of where we're going with all of this.
Thanks, Sophia.
By the way, just wanted to let you know that we have 2 questions written in the chat. If you're not
Great.
seeing the chat, it's you can access it by clicking the little chat bubble on the top right corner of the screen and on Discord. If you see on the top right, yep.
Great. Okay, cool. How much change your approach to generative curation about coding and the technical? Oh yes! Oh my God! Okay, so coding changed everything. I mean, it is the reason why I can actually provide meaningful critique. It's the reason why I can, actually like sit down with artists, sit down in their studios, go through their work. I mean, here's a really good example in this project here, and in this curation. We have this work here by Dmitry Cherniak that is supposed to allude this idea of watercolor. And when we first got it printed, there was an issue that it wasn't really printing all that well, and I was able to go to Dimitri's studio and help him debug the work, and we ended up just having to change the way in which the SVG was being rendered. But the fact that I was able to sit down there with him and find what was wrong, what was missing, was really, again, it's why I can provide, again, those meaningful critiques. And some of the works that I've done with art blocks, with artists in the pipeline, I go through it. And also now I'm exploring more writing in the sense of being able to provide my own critique, and not in a bad way, but analyzing someone's code, which I think is a really big part of their artwork, because the visual aspect, the final aesthetics, is just one piece of the puzzle. The functions that they create, how they write their work, also plays a huge role in the final output. And so now I'm like my curatorial practice really taking a shift in being able to provide that context for other creatives who are interested in understanding the ways in which the code was written. So there's this quote by Frieder Nake that he wrote in an essay of his. It was paragraphs on computer art, and he said, in order to find the masterpiece, critics and art historians must be willing to analyze the algorithm, and no one no one wants to do that. But I do. And so I think that it's going to kind of be, I'm hoping that, over the next few months, few years, I'll be able to kind of provide more of that sort of feedback and critique in the space, and really look at code as a proper art form, and its own poetry and it's like so. Let's see. Within the realm of generative art, but outside of algorithmic art, how do you find yourself contextualizing AI art for audiences that aren't familiar with that art form? I've been doing that also since the very beginning. So here we have a few AI artworks. I have one here by Helena Sarin, and these sculptures here are actually AI generated by an artist named Ben Snell. And it's the importance of physical exhibition for me that makes this really, really this mission like so important, and why I love doing in-person exhibitions, because it's during this moment where I actually get to have those one-on-one conversations with everyday people who come into these shows kind of just like curious. And I can write till I'm blue in the face, but there's nothing like just having a conversation with someone with the artwork in front of them and being able to explain to them the process that went behind this. And so I'm hoping, to continue this practice of, showcasing AI artwork, doing more interviews with artists, and getting their stories out there in like various ways, not just writing. So video is going to be important. Again, speaking one-on-one is going to be important. Podcast maybe, who knows? But it's one of those things that also is going to require a lot of foundational education, because algorithmic art is one thing to wrap your head around. GAN art is a whole other thing to wrap your head around. And GAN is so new. It came out in 2016. Ian Goodfellow, I believe, was the who produced the first paper. But luckily, I have a wonderful group of artists who are experts in the field, including Helena Sarin, who are always happy to kind of talk with me about it. And so it's kind of my job to then translate that to the everyday person and try to break it down for them. So hopefully that's helpful. So yeah, if there's any other questions that you guys might have on this, I'm all ears. Where is it? Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. You've been talking extensively about the display challenges of Gen Algo art when producing a physical show. What are the major challenges when curating an online exhibition, metaverse or not? There's a lot. There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of fun in producing a work or an exhibition online, especially when it comes to these works that are performing natively in the browser. I think that's like one of the things that fascinates me the most, and one of the things that's made me so excited about this idea of on-chain work or just working with digitally native work. So there might be that sense that like exhibiting it in the browser actually makes the most sense. However, when you there's a power also in just, I think, I'll go back to the pandemic and how exciting some of the things that were happening were at that time. I do remember there was one night I was with my boyfriend at the time, and we had there was an artist that we really adored showcasing a work online in like this metaverse exhibit. And we sat there with our glasses of wine, going through the exhibit, picking out which works we wanted to acquire. Like that is so fun, and something that you could actually do online that you couldn't during the pandemic. So, in those contexts, like, it's amazing. And it was just kind of like funny, sitting there in my hoodie, drinking a glass of wine, and like, pinky up at an art exhibition, great. But, at the same time, there's also the struggle that happens, and kind of what I was alluding to in my case study with the digital, where how does your relationship change with this artwork when you experience it in person? And there's something really, really important that happens when you actually pull the work out of the computer and get to experience it in this physical world that we live in, amongst a group of people, amongst people that you like want to engage with and talk about. That as much as I love what we're able to do online, and the even like right now, we're all able to have this conversation, without seeing one another, and it's still just as meaningful. But there's still something that happens when you're all sitting down with each other, and you get to feel the energy in a kind of different way that I love to explore. But I think one of the things that I that's missing when you do an online only exhibition is something that, again, I love to do, which is the conversation side. I think the conversations are where the magic really, really happens, and where my job really comes into play, where I get to have that conversation with someone who might be missing context that maybe if they're looking at it online isn't going to ask, or I won't go out of my way to be like, hey, do you have any questions? Let me talk to you about it. So the main struggle I see in the online only exhibition is making sure that I'm available to provide all the context in a way that makes sense to the viewer, because you have to meet people where they are. And if I write something online that is too jargon focused, or maybe it's not going too in depth enough. So that's one of the struggles that I find with some of the writing I've been working on lately for some books that are coming out, where I was trying to write something that my sister or my cousin who knows nothing about this type of work can understand, where the editor's pushing me to write a little bit more advanced for the everyday, for someone who's a little bit more advanced in the field to maybe relate to. And so it's finding that balance. And when you're having a conversation with someone in person, you can meet them where they are and give them the explanation that best fits them. So those are kind of the struggles that exist in kind of going through whether something should be a digital or a physical exhibition, or not should be, but that exists between both. So yeah, hopefully that was helpful. Do you have any other questions? I'm trying to think if there's anything else I can just riff off in the meantime, but I think one thing that's important for artists, especially while you're going through this, is finding curators that you trust. It's really difficult to create in a vacuum, and when you can find someone that has your best interests at heart, that understands what you're trying to do, and can give you that sort of feedback, it's really it's key. And something that is also really important as from a curatorial standpoint is that my job is not to tell you what to do. My job is not to tell you how to create your artwork. I can provide kind of my insights. I can provide, some things that I think about. But if you're ever working with someone who's telling you how to do your art, just be wary of that, and always just do what you think is best. Our job is to provide recommendations, and they're just that, recommendations, and guidance. But our job is to really pull something out of you that we know might exist, and it's important for them to understand your art form. So the reason why I'm a good generative art curator, algorithmic art curator, is because I have context into both the arts and computer science and coding and all of these things. If you're someone who does photography, I am not the person to talk to. You know what I mean? If you wanted to ask me about your photography, I might have my own personal subjective opinion, but I'm not coming from a place of expertise on that front. So really find people who understand what you're doing, or at least are passionate about what you're doing and want to learn about it. I think that's really important, finding those relationships, because curators are the ones who are going to help make sure that your story gets told in a meaningful way.
Okay, that's fantastic.
Okay, well, great, guys. I mean, I guess we're at time, right? We did it, no? Oh, we have a little bit more time.
We usually have about an hour and a half, so we actually have half an hour more. If anyone has any questions.
Yeah. Don't be shy. You guys got me for 30 more minutes if you need me. So there's a lot to cover, and there's a lot of different things. Even if you want to talk about release strategy, or thinking about your careers as artists. If there's any pressing questions, I work with artists pretty much every single day, thinking about how they're trying to how to think about release schedules, pricing, and things of this sort. I talk with collectors also pretty much daily. So please use this time as however you want. And there are no bad questions.
Sofia, do you have recommendations for how to price these artworks in this particular space? I have found in my own experience that a price can be very high, it could be very low, and the artwork will sell um, either really well or not.
Yeah.
It's just a strange circumstance in which an artwork priced very high will sell immediately, and one that's priced very low will sell not at all, and vice
Mhm.
versa. So I'm curious
Yeah.
about strategies that you might be able to suggest based upon your own experience. What kinds of calculations or I don't know, rules of thumb, heuristics do you use when setting price points for your represented stable of artists?
Oh, absolutely. I have a lot of thoughts on this. So one thing I think it's really important to remember is that what we're looking at is a long-term career. I think that what is one of the big issues, or one of my bigger concerns about the NFT space, is just the speed in which it moves and the speed in which people expect their artwork to sell, and at an exponential price. So I'll go, for example, in 2019 and 2020, I was selling these generative artworks for a couple $100, at most $2,000, at most. Um, just a year following, some of these artists were selling again at the top of the speculative market for millions of dollars. That is not sustainable. It's not sustainable. Now we've seen kind of like the market is always kind of moving. And so, artists who were selling at these price points are now kind of like gripping with their price points, what to do, what should I be doing, all of these things. And so if you can really manage a really steady increase, but like uh, it's really, really important. So like if there's an artist that's just getting started and let's say you've never sold an artwork before, do not expect to sell your artwork for $5,000. It's just not going to happen. It's really important that you get your artwork in at an accessible price point to a large or a solid amount of collectors. So if that means your first 5 artworks are going to different collectors at $500, that is a win. $500 is a lot of money. And I think right now, people are really, it's the pro and con of this like decentralized art world is how transparent everything is. And so when you see something sell for $10,000, you're like, well, what the hell? This person just bought this for $10,000. But, has this artist been working on their community for a really long time? Have they been, have they sold their artwork for maybe the last year at like $1,000? And there's this one work and these collectors start fighting over it. It's really important that you create this base foundation of collectors that, again, come in at accessible price points, so that they grow with you. That's a really important part of it. They want to grow with you. And so, and I'll use Tyler Hobbs as an example. The first artwork I bought from Tyler was $300. Same for Dimitri. The first work I bought from his was $300. And, I moved with them as it gradually turned into $500, to $600, to $900. And, it was, I was also doing payment plans with them, I will say, in those early days. But, I grew with them, and it was at a steady rate over a series of, over like a year or two, of, if I bought their work in 2018 for $300, and in 2019 I'm spending $900, like that makes sense to me. Like that's a solid increase. And I'm not the only collector that they're selling to. There are multiple collectors that they're selling to, and they're getting their story out, and they're kind of, again, cultivating this this like history and the story. It's like, why should you be paying attention to my artwork? This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm trying to talk about. And, that's when, again, working with the curator and getting your work into a show will then kind of help increase those price points. But you have to find your base layer, or your base level, that understanding the market and what people are willing to pay for your work at any given time. So when I was working with Harshit Agrawal, for example, it was kind of nice to just put the artwork up and not list it and see, what people were willing to pay for it. One thing, a really good example of this also was Tyler Hobbs. Last year in Sotheby's, we did a generative art auction. And, it was kind of post this, again, 2021 bull run. The works were going at really insane price points. And, it's kind of a scary time. And I helped curate that exhibition. So it was kind of looking at, what will these artworks sell for? Like, what's it going to look like? And to Tyler's, to his credit, he did not put a reserve on the artwork. And he said, let's see what the market's willing to pay for it. Let's see where we're at. And so it was a really cool moment to allow collectors to come in and kind of show, this is how much I think that this artwork is worth, and this is how much we're willing to pay for it at this given moment. And it was just that at that given moment. And so, you have to kind of look at where we are and understand that it's not just a one size fits all approach. Again, that it's a very nuanced thing, and it's not just up only. There will be days where you sell your artwork for, $5,000. Be a day that you for $2,000, but as long as you're not going from $5,000 to $200, I think you're going to be okay. Like there's a rhythm to this that, again, I think it's important to think about. Like, if your goal is to sell your work for $1 million, there are artists that have to work their entire life or die before they get to that price point. You know what I mean? Like, it's going to take time. And so it was worrisome for me to see these artists that, of course, I love to see their work sell for $1 million, but it's also an opportunity for their market to implode amongst themselves because there's only so many collectors that can come in at that price point. It's making sure that you have these accessible price points in this very early stage. Start thinking through your release schedule, making sure that it's kind of steady, but also not too much. It's an intricate balance, and it's why it's kind of important to start finding people that you can work with, that can kind of provide this sort of guidance. And luckily, we're at a space now where more and more people are starting to kind of come in at this agent role or trying to help provide the service to artists, which makes me really, really happy. But yeah. Hopefully that was helpful. It's kind of a non-answer, but it's an answer in the same way.
It's a hardening answer. It's a hardening answer insofar as it provides some reassurance. But I'm imagining that in my own case, I'm a kind of fluctuating personality. I've sold works for $5,000 with ease, and yet struggled to sell something for $50 or $500. It seems very strange that it's. The trajectories for the pricing can vary somewhat radically or wildly from artwork to artwork. So I was just curious about the rationales for that, perhaps the reasoning behind it. Your answer is perfectly heartening, though. I appreciate you weighing in with your own experience as a curator. And I would follow up with just one last question then about Tyler Hobbs. Setting no reserve on an auction price. Is that something that you would recommend people do as an experiment? Or is that just a particular case that was anomalous? It was a fun experiment to run. But is that actually a recommended practice here?
I think it really depends, because I think at that moment, Tyler had kind of, he clearly had a record. He clearly had passionate collectors that he knew that there would be some price action, but it was actually a really good moment for him to kind of level set and understand where he was at that given moment. There are times where I would advise against that, and that is if you are really passionate about a specific artwork. Maybe you're still trying to understand what your market looks like, or what your market looks like, and you feel really confident that, look, I am not going to sell this artwork unless it sells for this much, and I would rather hold on to it until I find a collector that's willing to pay this price. And there are instances where, I've participated in an auction, just selling my own work from my own collection, where I put a high reserve price because I'm not selling that unless it goes for this price point because I think it's worth that much. So that is also a double-edged sword where you might shoot yourself in the foot if you're overpricing your work. But there's again a balance at play where the art as an artist, or hopefully you're working with you can find someone to work with who can kind of give you the guidance and being like, no, don't underprice your work, because that does happen at times too. But I think in an auction, putting no having no reserve price is a really good way to see like where your collectors are feeling at a given moment. So it's not to say no, don't do it. I just think that there are certain contexts in which it's important to at least have a base level if you're trying to secure a specific baseline for your work. So, and again, within reason. So if you're selling your work, if your last works have been selling at $5,000 and you want to make sure that you're not going, like I would set a reserve maybe at like $2,000 and see if it gets up to that 5,000 or maybe it surpasses it. But at the very least, you're not selling under 2,000 because it would kind of be a bummer to be selling works at $5,000 and then maybe you put no reserve and someone comes in and places a bid for $5 and maybe people weren't paying attention that day and that's kind of what happens. So when you're talking about these larger scale exhibitions, obviously that's not always the case, but yeah, that's kind of my thought process on it. You always want to have a reserve price that would maybe bring in collectors that might see it as kind of like oh, cool. Like if their work sells at 5,000, they're selling us at 2. This is a great in for me. I might be able to get this at 2. And then it kind of creates this conversation between other collectors who might feel the same way, and they start bidding against each other. And then that fight kind of starts. I see that there's some other questions here, so I'm going to lean over to that, but hopefully that was...
Absolutely. Thanks again.
Okay, great. Of course. What kind of reception have you seen around editions from collectors, maybe within the traditional art world, who aren't familiar with this model in the Web3 space? How do you talk about this? Well, editions have always existed. One of the works from this little piece here by Helena Sarian was an edition of 5 prints. Editions are totally cool. I think that people are open to it. I think when it comes to open editions, maybe that's what you're asking. Open editions, it's an interesting one, but I think that editions can be a really good way to, again, bring in more collectors, allow people to come in and acquire your work at an accessible price point if you already hit a moment in your career that you've kind of isolated a specific spending demographic that can acquire your work. I think editions can be a really great tool to have in your toolbox as an artist, but not something that is abused. They're really great. Just again when they're used accordingly. So is there a pricing strategy shift as an artist moves from Web3 to the traditional art world, where there's often different demographic and where one might have a different reputation or clout? I think that this pricing strategy happens more on the ETH versus fiat conversation. And so, our community, or even just crypto, because you might be on Tezos, for example, but I think that the pricing strategy is different in a sense, but at the same time, pretty much rings true to what's currently happening in the crypto market. So, for example, at the height of the market, we had, and I'll use Dimitri as an example. His work was selling for a lot of ETH. His work went to Sotheby's, and the traditional art collector that I had been working with at the time, who before collecting generative art, really only collected Monet and Degas. They did not even collect contemporary artwork. They were strictly an impressionist art collector. They acquired this work for $1.5 million. And that it was pretty much in line with kind of like the height of that market at the time. So, it really depends on how much education this collector has, what they understand about the work. I did a lot of work with this collector to give them a lot of kind of like foundational knowledge on what it means to be producing generative art. They fell in love with this algorithm. They really connected with the artist. They had been acquiring his work for a while. So, it's things like this that make a difference. So as a whole, I wouldn't say that there's a big difference, but I think that there's a psychological difference when you see something that's priced at 2 ETH, and then you see that actually means, depending on where the market is, like that could be $4,000, and that's that can seem a little bit more jarring than 2 ETH. Let's see. Do you have any especially user-friendly resources for onboarding non-Web3 collectors to crypto wallets and sales platforms? I think Verse is doing a really good job with this. I will say they have really good price points. I know that they might already be able to allow you to pay with your credit card if you so wish. I think FX Hash is also doing a really great job of being able to pay in different price points in different currencies. Tonic is another one that's doing a really good job, but it's difficult. We're still in this experimental phase of trying to understand where we are in this Web3 ecosystem. It is the onboarding is really difficult. It really is. You have to have setting up wallets and setting up a Coinbase and exchange and all of these things. So we're still in this kind of like experimental phase, but there are people who are going for it, and I think the marketplaces that I named are really trying to solve that right now. As a concept, what do you think about live minting experiences for long form collections? Do you find it interesting, or do you have any suggestions for alternative use cases? I mean, I think it's fun. I mean, it's if you haven't experienced the live minting experience, it is very much recommended. The first time I did it, it was really special. I really loved it. I have to give a ton of credit and respect to Bright Moments and their team and what they've done with their live minting experiences. They really lean in to this entire idea of the again the experience. It's not just, oh, click a button and here it is. They have music, they have this ambiance, they really go all in, and every time I've experienced that, it's been really special. So I really like it. I think it's really fun. If I have an alternative use case, maybe we'll see it in an exhibition one day. But I think some of the things that I'm more interested in personally from a curatorial level is again like this idea of live performance. And so I've been chatting with more dancers, more actors, more creatives that are really looking into how do you use a generative system or an algorithm to produce choreography. How there's one artist that I've worked with, Blair Simmons. She actually won. We did a micro grant a few years back, and she won this micro grant because she produced an algorithm that creates a live script for actors to act from on stage. So the idea is that you come up on stage, this script is printed out for you automatically, and then you act it out there. And so I'm really looking into this year. I'd like to organize a lot more kind of like generative performance. That's a little bit different from, I would say, a long form minting experience where you're actually acquiring something, where this is more something to be it really is just to be experienced and to be viewed. So the different ways in which kind of like generative art manifests itself, I find really really exciting. Do you guys have anything else for me? I think we have like just 8 more minutes, right? Let's see.
Yes.
Yeah. Is anyone working on anything that you kind of want some guide, or if you're like thinking about display, or if you have any exhibitions coming up that you'd want to talk about? I'm open to having a quick little, you know, discussion on that. Oh, someone's typing. This is good. What level of contextualization and writing would you recommend artists provide on their works and their website? Oh my goodness! As much as you can provide, obviously the better. I know. Hopefully that's I'm not trying to give you more work, but it's always really helpful to understand an artist and how they think about things. One of the biggest issues I think that artists might find is that you're not being understood, or you're producing your artwork and you're releasing it and you're not giving us the opportunity to really know you and what you're trying to accomplish with your artwork. And so even if it's having a blog that you kind of write about things every now and then, or if it's participating in spaces where you can actually like talk about it, that's going to be really, really, really important. Because if I can look at your artwork at first glance and appreciate the aesthetics, or maybe I don't appreciate the aesthetics, but what you're doing is fascinating, I can't know unless you tell me. So it's really important that you guys really go out of your way to give as much information as possible in the way that you're thinking about your work or your process. This doesn't mean a long form essay every single week. This could be just honestly just like doing a Twitter thread, or just posting something that you're working on and kind of giving context into how it's being created, kind of like behind the scenes sort of look of like this is, and like now allowing me to kind of go through this process over the next few weeks while you kind of give us updates on what you're working on. So it doesn't always have to be this really intricate long form essay on your website, but at least providing some sort of space for us to go to and learn about your practice, whether it be your Twitter, your Instagram, your website, is always going to be really helpful. So yeah, I think again, like I'll use Matt Delorier and Tyler Hobbs as a good example. They have their own blogs. They when they release a project, they will have a blog post that kind of like goes with that. And you can go through and kind of look at their stuff, for example, if it's helpful. We say long form generative art now because of Tyler Hobbs's blog post that he wrote. So there's a lot of things that you can do with your writing that's a lot more powerful than you might think. So really lean into that as much as you can, and just get it out there. You need to be able to tell us what you're doing and how you're doing it. So yeah. Because without that, I don't know what I don't know is really like the most important part here. And so you have to remember that. It's not to say that your artwork isn't doing its job if it can't go out without writing, but I can go to a museum and see something that I think is absolutely stunning, but after I read the plaque, I'm like, holy shit, now this is something that I didn't even get at first glance. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
4
I guess
more
we have time for
minutes.
like one. Yeah, we have time for like one more question. But I guess in the meantime, maybe I'll do some self promotion. We have so Toshin's coming out with a book on NFTs. It's called On NFTs, and I wrote the chapter on algorithmic art, and so that's kind of going to be one of my first published writings, which I'm really really excited about. And it's a really long kind of essay detailing the history of algorithmic art and context with the Web3 ecosystem. I dive it a lot deeper into the history, the context, again more on like my own framework of how to think about and critiquing this type of work. And I do provide some critiques on some of the works that we kind of know and see today. And so that should be coming out hopefully sometime this year. And I'm really excited about it. And again, trying to work more on more essays on diving into the code and looking at the code as the art form itself, and being able to reflect on the different functions that artists are writing and things of this sort, which I do look at as kind of their own like brushstrokes. I guess is a better way of putting it. So yeah, that's my single self promotion. There's other things happening, but that's the one I'm most excited about.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I, I
Okay.
can't wait for that book to come out. It's quite exciting to see it.
Yeah, I'm very very excited. I can't wait. I can't even. So it was actually after the digital, that exhibition, that the editor happened to come to that show, and they were like, okay, it's clear that you have to be the one to write it. So this is also to say, go out of your way to do things that make you uncomfortable, and you never know what opportunities might come your way after that. Do you believe there is such a thing as overproduction for generative artists? You can overproduce work without selling it, you know what I mean? And not overproduce in a negative way. I think that, there's also this idea that like you can produce work and share the work without selling it. And I think that's something that I would also really push artists to do. Just because just because you create something doesn't mean it has to be minted. I think that, something though to understand the context in which generative artists work, or some generative artists work, especially if they are long form generative artists. Their power, what they're trying to showcase, is the power of their system. And so this system and its ability to produce 1,200, for example, artworks or independent as is really important to them, and is part of their study and what they're trying to do. So in this instance, they can produce or release 1,200 artworks, and that's not a lot for them because it is a system at play. Whereas, it might be different if you're producing, let's say you release 20 artworks in 1 week. They're all very, very different. That's, I would say, is like you're the kind of diluting your supply for no reason. There's a kind of a system at play. But one thing that happens with generative artists, which I find pretty cool, the long form generative art anyway, is this idea of like the network effects that happen when you have 1,000 artworks that kind of get minted right away. So if you look at some of these like curated releases, when 1,000 people or hundreds of people now own all of your artworks, there are now hundreds of people that can see this work, and again they share the same visual language, so they're easily identifiable. And so there's this network effect that happens where it's like, oh, I own this ringers, I own this whatever, and people instantly know it. And so because of that, there's something that happens in our ecosystem where like the memification of it, or the fact that it's being distributed all over the place and that there's so many eyes on it, it becomes more valuable the more people see it. And so it's not like kind of like in the traditional art world where it's like this like opaque thing and only certain people know, and the more people see it, the more valuable it is in its own weird way. And so you can look at that as kind of like the more it's shared. And so there's something cool about that happens with, I think, long form generative art projects. Like you can think at Zancan, if I say the word Zancan, you're instantly thinking about grass and these like kind of like somewhat apocalyptic visuals in a way. And yeah, and he's produced a lot of work. Zancan has produced so much work, but when you see a work, you instantly know that it's Zancan. And there's something really powerful about that too. So yeah, again, there's a fine balance between production and the release of these works. And hopefully, I think what you can see from kind of all my responses is that there's so much nuance that exists in our market and our ecosystem. And it's kind of like walking that fine balance. And I mean, Andy Warhol said it best: the best business is the best art. Is the best form of art. And there's something to be said about that. So I guess that's it.
Okay.
We actually hit our time. Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. This has been so wonderful. I think I still have it on my screen over here. If you need to reach me or anything, I'm on Twitter, Sofia Garcia _IO. My email is sophia@artxcode.io. If you're into Instagram, I'm just Sofia Garcia, no _IO. And yeah, that's me. Thank you so much.